And now on Nights with Steve Price from the 50-Up Club, Christopher Zinn.
Joins us every Thursday night. How are you, Mr. Zinn?
Good to speak to you again.
How long have you been paying health insurance for, do you reckon?
Probably since about the late 90s, when they really put in the sticks and carrots that if you didn't pay it, that you would actually end up with all sorts of surcharges and whatever. But I must admit, having the most basic of hospital cover only, of a sort with a very high excess and a very low premium.
Well, I reckon my parents signed me up probably when I was, a teenager. And then once I turned 18, of course, I then had to start paying myself. I think I've probably paid consistently through my whole life health insurance. Now, typical of men, I think, it's now managed by my wife, and the children are part of the package, and I've got no idea what it cost me. Now, that's dreadful, I know, but that's how I run my life. But I reckon that I'd be paying a fortune. I'd be horrified, I reckon, if I found out how much I was paying.
You would. It's probably more than, the average we found is about $2,000, $2,500 for family cover, if that includes extras as well. So, look, it is a significant amount. And I must say, I do have that extras cover now. The reason I didn't earlier in life, coming from the UK and the National Health Service, I was rather used to the public paying as opposed to private, but I know that that's no longer feasible. So you've got to actually match up or not necessarily expect too much through the public system.
So for some reason, this is almost a category on its own in that it says we're independent about putting up prices. It's all an independent regulator. They decide when the price should go up. And by the way, it's going to go up by 5.6% this year. And the minister goes, well, it's an independent tribunal and they decide whether it should go up by that much. It's way in front of inflation. And I imagine a lot of people are contacting you saying they're cranky.
And it is, and they're cranky every year because it happens on April the 1st every year. And look, the minister has made a point of saying this is lower than the average 6% increase that's happened since the turn of the century. That sounds a long time ago, but essentially in 7 years it's gone up 50%. And really, while there is a political oversight into the increases, and this time the government did push back and screwed down the amount, it's still significant. And, every time this happens, more and more people leave the system or downgrade the cover. So we're seeing the government really moving into reform mode around private health insurance, which is probably a good thing, and they're talking about empowering consumers. But I still think there's this big issue of confidence because, as we've discussed before, you go to use your private health insurance, and I don't care how many letters they send you beforehand saying what you're up for as a co-payment or a gap payment. It's going to cost you more than you thought it would do, 9 times out of 10.
I'd like to get Susan Ley on the program, the health minister, because I'll guarantee, I might be being unkind to her, but I'd almost guarantee that if I said to her, what do you pay? What is your extras cover? What would your gaps be, do you think, if you had this condition and that condition? And Minister, do you really think that any government, yours included, has made it easier for people to compare funds? I even heard, I mentioned it to the other day, the boss of Bupa says it's almost impossible to compare one fund against another fund. Yeah,
and it's very tricky, and a lot of that is to do with all the regulation that's around it, i.e. the sticks and the carrots, the lifetime health cover, the levy, the bits and pieces. I mean, insurance is complicated as enough, but when you have all this sort of other regulation around it, it does make it harder. There is a good government website called privatehealth.gov, which actually does allow you to compare, but it's still difficult to do, and it's kind of like you need a trusted advisor really to do it, and they don't necessarily exist in this space. So you've got to persevere, and it's not like there are great offers out there. It comes at a cost, and that cost goes up significantly. It doesn't go down much.
You've done some interesting research on this, including I'll give people a stat in a moment, or make them fall off the chair or drive off the road. But one well-kept tip, one tip you've got, which I'd not realised, is pay the whole thing in a one-off payment, an annual payment. Pay it before the 1st of April, and you avoid the pay rise.
Exactly.
Is that true?
It is true. And speak to your insurer. And when they withdrew the 30% rebate, they means tested it a few years ago. A huge slab of people got wise to that trick and paid ahead of April the 1st and enjoyed the 30% rebate, even though they would have lost that through the means test. So, yes, that is often paying ahead has benefits, not, in this case, that is to save 6%. I suppose you could work it out over in terms of the cost if you can afford that. But given the low rates of return in term deposits these days, I'd suggest that paying off your health insurance in advance might be quite a good move.
Certainly this year would be one way to do it, and every year for the last 5 years. The other stat, the Herald Sun did some work on this, and they calculated an average insurance premium. So, everyone's different, but they had an average, and they averaged it out that since 2002, health insurance premiums have jumped by 142%.
Yeah, well, look, I can believe it because, of course, 5%, 6%, 7% year on year. It's amazing how quickly that more than double. Over 10 years, that doubles it. So, yeah, it has gone up, and it's this sort of,
142%.
Yeah. Well, look, the funds will argue, one, that medical inflation is higher and there's greater technology and the cost of everything go up. That's true to an extent. Then also that more people are claiming for more things, so that it increases their costs. But again, the simple fact is people are finding it unaffordable. Worse than that, and in polls show this, when exit polls, when people leave, which they're doing in droves, it's the uncertainty over the cover that actually there's all these gap payments and out-of-pocket payments that actually make them really lose confidence in the system. And insurance, I think we've discussed before, is probably not the right word for this, because you really don't know what you're covered for. Unlike insurance for car or house, that's when there's a fire or something really extraordinary happens. Health insurance, you're going to use most people most of the time, but the uncertainty around it really does destroy confidence.
Can't think of any other product that would have gone up every year since 2002 and risen by that much. I don't think there'd be anything else. Christopher, always a pleasure to catch up with you, mate. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
From 50upclub.com, Christopher Zinn.